Today's project is this little cabinet. We're going to paint this one just for something new. As you see, I've already gotten some of the repairs taken care of. Two of the drawers had dovetails. They were just coming apart. So all they had to be is glued and clamped back in place. You've seen me do that, so I did that ahead of time. And then lots of the veneer on the legs was coming apart, so that was all glued and clamped. And I'll take these clamps off. The technique I'm going to show you mostly, other than the painting, is a way of filling in veneer damage like we see here. I use auto body filler, Bondo, and actually that's the accepted way of doing it. It's flexible enough and strong enough that it'll hold up. So what we'll do is we'll fill in all the voids in the cabinet on the legs with Bondo, and then you can see here there's a big piece of veneer missing here, so we'll Bondo in there. And then once that's all done and sanded and everything's nice and smooth, we'll light sand the side of the cabinet and the face of the cabinet. We'll prime it and we'll paint it. And then after the paint dries, we'll do a little bit of glazing on it, and then we will top coat it either with lacquer or polyacrylic, polyacrylic being a water-based polyurethane. Whichever one I decide to grab is what we'll do it with. Again, you know, this is a piece that's probably going to bring, you know, 50 to 70 bucks when it's done. I have $5 in it, so we're not going to go overboard with what we do. But it'll be a fun little project, and it'll get a chance to show us some new techniques. So we'll get started on this and see how we come out. The screws that hold on this pull plate are either stripped or glued into these little studs that hold the bail. So what I've done is I've taken the bail off. I've run an awl through the two of them to hold them still. I heated them up just a little bit with a torch, so that will loosen the glue. And then using a rather large screwdriver, it's a little difficult to do this with one hand, but I was able to break that screw loose. So I'm going to get to work on the other one. Hopefully I'll get that one loose too without completely breaking this off. last night before I turned in, I glazed this piece. Basically, I just took the same kind of glaze we used when we did the Victorian bookcase, but this time it was black. And then using a chip brush, I just dipped the chip brush lightly into the glaze and applied streaks of it in the direction of what would be the grain direction of the piece. And then I took a rag and just pulled it down, wiped it. So you can see what we've got here, just a very faint hint of black, a little bit darker on the legs, because that's where dirt and wear would be if it was old. And same thing on the top. So it'll give it a little depth of color when we shoot the final coat of lacquer on it. And you can see the effect that the glaze had. And it also kind of toned down the lipstick red a little bit, makes it more of a blood red. Now I think it's a little bit more attractive. So I'm going to shoot a coat of lacquer on this, and then as it's drying we'll work on the hardware. And as soon as the lacquer's dry enough to install the hardware, we'll get that done, and we'll be done with this little piece. Attention to the hardware. The problem with the screws where they had, whoever worked on this before had screws in that were too long, and they tried to jam them in there and they just torqued the living bejesus out of them. Unfortunately, these aren't stripped out. They're 832s and they need to be 1 inch long. The ones they had there were 1 1/4 inches, and rather than put washers behind them, they just cranked on them and tried to get them tight. These are just pressed steel and they'll blow out fairly quickly. There's a couple things you can do. This color is really not wonderful with black. I mean, it would be okay, with red. What I'd like to do is pull in a little bit of black to match the glazing. We can either paint these, but what I'm going to use today and show you is a product called Rub and Buff. And it's basically a wax that has, I guess, metal flake in it and dye. I'm not exactly sure. When I first was introduced to it, I never thought it would stick, but it does. And if you screw it up, you can just hit it with some mineral spirits and it comes right off. But anyways, it comes in a little tube like this. It comes in a bunch of colors, and you just dab a little bit on your finger and rub it on. And you can rub it off and give it whatever effect you want, but you can see right away how that gives a really nice and kind of an antiqued look to this. And that's just a little bit of it. You can compare it to that one, see the difference. So we're going to rub and buff these in a dark black. And in a little while, when the lacquer hardens up, we'll reinstall it and we'll call this done. I wanted to show you a technique for shortening threaded screws that works very well. For some reason, I'm having problems with that piece of hardware that was stripped out. It won't accept the full length of these screws, and again, they're pressed steel, and I don't want to force it. So what I've done is I've chucked up an 8/32 screw, and the most important part is on the screw I mounted an 8/32 nut. So what will happen is I'll cut this, and when I cut it, it's going to gall the threads on the end. But when I back that nut off, it's going to recut the threads and I'll be able to use it. So watch. See, I've got a little grinder with a cutting wheel on it. You can use a hacksaw if you don't have a air tool. Now avoid the temptation of grabbing that right away because it's going to be hot. Just give it a little bit to cool off. I'll put a little something on there to cool it down. Alright, you can see, I hope you can see, that the threads on the end are galled. But when we back this screw out, it's going to recut those threads and then it'll be able to thread right back on. So that's a little trick to keep in your book of shortcuts. That'll save you a trip to Home Depot or Lowe's when you got a screw that's too long.